South China Sea, 210 nautical miles west of the Philippine coast, 3:12 local time. No moon. Overcast at 8,000 feet. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand at arm's length unless a radar screen is nearby. And on the USS Ronald Reagan, there are a lot of radar screens. SuGen-76, Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 104,000 tons of warship doing 28 knots through water that 3 different countries claim belongs to them. 5,000 sailors aboard, 70 aircraft spotted on 3 decks. 2 nuclear reactors running at a quiet 40% capacity because there's no reason to go faster tonight. The air wing had cycled off 4 hours ago. Half the ship is asleep. The other half is running routine watches, eating bad food in the galley, and arguing about baseball in the break room. Then the Spy-1 radar picks up the first contacts. Not 1, not 2. 11 surface tracks, moving fast, bearing 285 degrees. Then a 12th appears on the outer ring. Then 4 more. 15 surface contacts in formation, converging on the strike group at 38 knots. And above them, 6 additional tracks, climbing off the Chinese coast. J-15 Flanker Ds. Carrier-based fighters, subsonic at low altitude, going to afterburner. 16 warships, 6 fighters, all moving toward the Ronald Reagan at the same time. The plan, the People's Liberation Army Navy, believed the math was on their side. 15 surface combatants against 1 carrier strike group with air cover overhead at night in waters Beijing considers sovereign. The Americans were outnumbered on the surface. The fighters closed the air gap, and the Ronald Reagan's position had been tracked by 3 separate Chinese satellite constellations for 6 straight days. Every turn, every speed change, every aircraft launch, all logged. Beijing's calculus was simple. Demonstrate that the United States Navy cannot operate freely in the South China Sea without consequences. Not sink the carrier. Nobody's that reckless. The objective was to force the strike group into a defensive posture, ideally get footage of an American carrier turning away for the first time in history, and broadcast that footage on CCTV before sunrise. A carrier that backs down once backs down forever. That's the message they wanted to send. But the plan made 5 catastrophic miscalculations. First, the Ronald Reagan wasn't the only American ship in that ocean. The USS Chung-Hoon, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was running 40 miles ahead of the formation in a position the plan's satellite coverage hadn't catalogued, because the Chung-Hoon had been running dark for 18 hours. No active radar emissions, no radio traffic, invisible to everything except physics. And physics was about to remind everyone it still applies. Second, the E-2D, Advanced Hawkeye, orbiting at 25,000 feet, had been tracking the planned formation since they left port. Not since they entered the exclusion zone, since port. Every ship identified by hull number, every fighter by tail number. The flight lead of the J-15 package had been tracked for so long the Hawkeye crew had taken to calling him Persistent Pete on the internal comms. Professionally, of course. Third, the U.S. at Lake Champlain, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, had her Spy-1 radar in full active search mode, painting everything within 200 miles. The plan knew she was there. What they underestimated was that she had already built firing solutions on all 15 surface contacts before the first Chinese ship crossed the 100-mile ring. You don't need to fire immediately when you've already done all the math. Fourth, somewhere in the water column approximately 60 miles northeast, a Virginia-class fast attack submarine whose name and hull number I'm not going to speculate on, because some things you just don't discuss publicly, had been listening to the planned formation's propeller signatures for 3 days. 3 days of acoustic intelligence. Every ship catalogued. Every bearing logged. If things went bad on the surface, there were options. Fifth, and this is the one that matters most, the plan planned their entire operation around the assumption that an American carrier group confronted at night, outnumbered on the surface, would exercise caution. They were right about the caution. They were catastrophically wrong about what caution looks like when backed by layered radar coverage, supersonic interceptors, and a crew that has run this exact scenario in simulators approximately 1,400 times. Restraint isn't weakness. It's a choice. And a choice backed by a nuclear-powered warship, 2 destroyers, a cruiser, and an attack submarine is the most dangerous position any adversary can find themselves facing. What happened in the next 47 minutes became the most documented, most precisely executed gray zone confrontation in the history of the Western Pacific. 0 shots fired, 0 weapons released, 0 injuries, and yet, by 3:59 local time, 15 planned warships had reversed course, 6 J-15s had broken off their intercept, and the Ronald Reagan was continuing southwest at 28 knots, completely unbothered, launching the 400 alert cycle on schedule. What happens when the largest fleet in the world runs into the most capable fleet in the world? Stick around, because the answer is more interesting than you'd think. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss the breakdown of exactly how the Ronald Reagan strike group managed this confrontation without firing a single weapon, and why that's actually more impressive than if they had. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what the Ronald Reagan was doing there in the first place. Freedom of navigation, that's the official term. FONLKS in the acronym SOUP, the Navy runs on. The Reagan Strike Group had been conducting routine freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea for 11 days as part of a sustained Pacific deployment, operating in international waters that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is pretty clear about. The fact that Beijing draws a 9-dash line on a map and claims 90% of the South China Sea as sovereign territory is a legal position that exactly one international arbitration tribunal has evaluated and rejected. The reef building program, the artificial islands, the anti-ship missile batteries installed on those islands, none of that changes the legal status of the water column itself. The Reagan Strike Group had been operating in the region for months. In that time, they had conducted 23 freedom of navigation operations, participated in joint exercises with the Philippine, Japanese, and Australian navies, and been shadowed by planned surface combatants on 14 separate occasions. None of those 14 occasions escalated beyond radio challenges and close approach maneuvers. Night 15 was different. 3 days before the incident, signals intelligence had picked up unusually high communication traffic between Plolan's Southern Theater Command and the Surface Action Group that would later converge on the Reagan. The 7th Fleet duty officer flagged it. The Reagan's commanding officer was briefed. The strike group quietly tightened its defensive posture, shortened its flight deck cycles, and made sure the alert aircraft were armed and spotted. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know exactly when, so they got ready for all of it at once. The Surface Action Group that planned Southern Theater Command dispatch was built around 2 Type 055 Renhai-class cruisers. Let's talk about those for a moment, because they are not nothing. The Type 055, 12,000 tons, 180 meters long, 112 vertical launch cells carrying a mix of RJ-18 anti-ship missiles, HQ-9B surface-to-air missiles, and Sea-5 anti-submarine rockets. Active phased array radar, top speed around 30 knots. Each one costs approximately $900 million and represents the most capable surface combatant, China has ever built. The Western naval community spent years debating whether planned surface ships were capable of blue water operations. The Type 055 ended that debate. These are serious warships crewed by trained sailors who practice what they do. Flanking the two Renhais were 6 Type 052D Luoyang IIA-class destroyers, 7,500 tons each, 64 VLS cells, YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles with a range of 400 kilometers, and the HHQ-16 medium-range SAM. Then 5 Type 054 frigates on the outer ring, and 2 Type 903 are replenishment ships trailing behind, because a fleet that plans to stay in the field long enough to matter brings its own gas station. This was not an improvised response. This was a planned, organized, well-resourced surface action group built around the best hardware China currently operates. The J-15 Flanker Ds, providing air cover, are fourth-generation carrier fighters capable of carrying the PL-15 air-to-air missile out to 200 kilometers. On paper, the plan was sending serious capability. On paper. Now let's talk about what the plan was actually walking into. The Reagan Strike Group's air defense posture that night was built around the Spy-1DAV Aegis radar system, distributed across the Lake Champlain, and both Arleigh-Burke destroyers. The Spy-1D4 fixed-phased arrays per ship, no moving parts, tracking up to 300 targets simultaneously out to 200 nautical miles, building fire solutions on all of them at once while simultaneously engaging the highest priority threats. Not sequentially, all of them at once. The 6 J-15s, the plan launched as their air cover, were flying into radar coverage before they finished their initial climb. By the time they reached their operating altitude, the Lake Champlain had tracking quality data on all 6. Tail number quality, the kind of track that translates directly to an engagement solution without any additional sensor queuing. The Reagan's combat air patrol that night was 2 F/A-18F Super Hornets from VFA-2, the Bounty Hunters, carrying AIM-120D AMRAAMs, 12 feet long, 335 pounds, Mach 4 terminal velocity, engagement range out past 100 nautical miles, and for the classified extended range version, significantly farther than that, but we'll leave that number where it lives, which is in a vault somewhere in Patuxent River, Maryland. The J-15s were operating at ranges where the AMRAAM could engage them before they had an equivalent shot back. That's not a guess. That's physics and published specifications doing math together, and the math doesn't care about anybody's feelings. The Chung-Hoon, running dark 40 miles ahead of the formation, was the invisible hand. Her radar stayed off. Her weapons stayed warm. She was a loaded gun nobody could see. And under the water, the Virginia-class boat, whatever she was, wherever she was, had MiG-48 ADCAP torpedoes that can track and kill a surface ship at ranges the crews of those Type 055s would find genuinely uncomfortable if they knew the geometry. Like being followed home by someone who knows a shortcut you don't. At 3:18, the Reagan's TOO, Tactical Action Officer, picks up his phone and briefs the commanding officer. The TO is already in the Combat Direction Center. He was there before the contacts appeared. Intuition, or good intelligence work, or both. The Lake Champlain's commanding officer comes up on the encrypted net. 2 Type 055s are inside 80 miles. The outer destroyer screen is at 95 miles. The J-15s are 130 miles out, descending to a lower altitude. The Reagan turns into the wind. Alert aircraft. 2 F/A-18Fs off the bow catapults, climbing hard through 15,000 feet in under 90 seconds. They don't go to afterburner immediately. They don't need to. They just need to be airborne and on frequency. The Hawkeye quarterbacks the whole thing from 25,000 feet. Every contact tagged. Every bearing updated. Every ship in the plan formation watched by sensors that cost more than some countries' annual defense budgets. At 3:24, the Lake Champlain issues a radio challenge on the International Maritime Distress Frequency. Standard procedure. Identifies herself. States the formation she is part of. Requests the approaching ships identify themselves and state their intentions. Professional. Correct. Required under CLREGS before anything else happens. The plan formation does not respond. At 3:29, the challenge goes out again. 3 times now, total, still no response. At 3:31, the Reagan's Co. makes a decision. The cap fighters push forward to a holding position 60 miles in front of the formation. Not threatening, not closing, just present and visible on radar to anyone with a working scope, which the plan absolutely has. The plan lead Type 055 crosses inside 60 miles at 3:37. That's a range where the SASM-2 block II missiles aboard the Lake Champlain, and both destroyers have solid engagement envelopes against every surface contact in the formation. Nobody fires anything. Nobody is planning to fire anything. But everybody on both sides understands the geometry now. The J-15s have been holding at 90 miles for 11 minutes. They flew all the way out here, went to fuel-burning altitude, and are now flying race tracks waiting for a green light that appears to be taking longer than advertised. At 3:41, the lead J-15 pilot, Persistent Pete, pushes his formation to 70 miles. Maybe he's testing the response. Maybe he got a radio call from Shore Command that we'll never hear the recording of. Either way, he just crossed into the outer engagement envelope of the AM-120D, carried by the 2 Super Hornets holding 60 miles ahead of the Reagan. The cap flight lead calls the Hawkeye. Hawkeye calls the Reagan. The Reagan calls the Lake Champlain. Nobody fires anything. But the cap lead turns his radar on. Active emissions. Not locked. Just searching. Just making sure everybody's scope lights up simultaneously and shows the same picture. Persistent Pete sees the radar energy. His threat warning system is working fine. He can see exactly where the Super Hornets are. He can do the range math himself. At 3:44, Persistent Pete turns left. The other 5 J-15s follow in sequence. They are now pointed away from the Reagan strike group, still over international waters, still legal, but no longer closing. On the surface, the Type 055s are still inside 55 miles, still converging. The destroyer screen is fanning out, which is either a tactical spread for engagement or the beginning of a course change. The Hawkeye is watching every ship simultaneously. At 3:47, the lead Type 055 goes to flank speed, 30 knots. For a moment, that looks worse, not better. Then she starts a slow turn to the north. Flank speed on a turn to the north. She's not attacking. She's repositioning. And as she turns, the second Type 055 follows her. Then the destroyers begin their own turns, one by one, the formation pivoting like a door closing. By 3:52, all 15 surface contacts are on northerly headings. By 3:59, the nearest planned ship is outside 80 miles and opening. The J-15s are already on the back end of their profile, well within range to recover aboard whatever carrier they launched from. Total time from first contact to plan withdrawal, 47 minutes. Total weapons released, 0. Total communications between American and planned forces that night, 3 radio challenges, all from the Lake Champlain, all unanswered. The entire confrontation was conducted in silence on one side and professional readiness on the other. At 4:01, the Reagan launches her 400 alert cycle, right on time. 2 Super Hornets off the bow catapult on schedule, because the flight schedule doesn't adjust for the plane's feelings. Let's understand what just happened, because the headline, "No shots fired," undersells it badly. The plane committed 2 of their most capable cruisers, 6 destroyers, 5 frigates, and 6 carrier fighters to an operation designed to alter American behavior in the South China Sea. The operation lasted 47 minutes and ended with all plane forces in retreat and the Ronald Reagan on her original course at her original speed, launching aircraft on schedule. The cost to the United States: some jet fuel, some radar electricity, approximately 0 disruption to the 400 schedule. The cost to the plane: the footage they wanted doesn't exist. The carrier didn't turn away. The withdrawal footage belongs to them, not us, and you can bet that footage is sitting in somebody's server room in Beijing, rather than playing on CCTV. Now China, Russia, and every other regional power with aspirations of challenging American naval supremacy is watching. They all saw the same thing. A layered defense that made 15 warships reverse course without a single weapon leaving a launcher. They're looking at that and trying to figure out where the gap is. There isn't one. This is what modern networked warfare looks like. It's not a single ship defending itself. It's a formation where every platform feeds data to every other platform, where the Hawkeye sees what the submarine hears and the cruiser tracks what the submarine sees, where a fighter pilot 60 miles ahead of the formation has the same tactical picture as the admiral 60 miles behind him. The plan brought the right hardware. They were sailing into a system, not just a ship. And that is a distinction that can't be closed by building better missiles. You close it by building the same kind of integrated, practiced, networked force that takes years of real operations to develop. Not exercises, operations. The plan is learning. But learning and being ready are 2 different things. Mathematics doesn't grade on a curve. Somewhere in Zhanjiang, at Plan Southern Theater Command, an officer is sitting in front of a briefing that nobody wanted to give. The formation spent fuel. The pilots logged hours. The satellite coverage documented nothing useful. And the strike group they went to confront is somewhere south of where it was, completely unchanged, running flight operations. The after-action report writes itself. 15 ships, 6 fighters, perfect execution of the plan. And the plan achieved nothing because the plan was built on an assumption. That presence creates pressure, and that pressure creates retreat. And that assumption meant a carrier strike group that has run this exact scenario so many times that pressure is just another thing on the daily brief. You do not pressure the United States Navy into retreat by showing up with ships. You would need to show up with something those sailors haven't already planned against, rehearsed against, wargamed against, and fitted countermeasures to. The plan hasn't built that yet. The Ronald Reagan continued southwest. For her crew, this was Tuesday, an unusual Tuesday maybe, the kind you mention to your family when you get home 6 months later, but a Tuesday. Trying to bluff a carrier strike group into backing down is like trying to stare down a lighthouse. The lighthouse isn't looking back at you. It doesn't need to. It just keeps turning. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what integrated naval operations actually look like in the modern Western Pacific, share it with someone who's been following the South China Sea situation and wants the real operational context, not just the headlines. Like and subscribe so you don't miss our next breakdown, how the plane's carrier program compares to American carrier doctrine, and why the gap is larger than the ship count suggests.